To slave market and the riverside. Before we start this talk, in memory of our lost ancestors, those who lost their life from the hinterlands to this place, from here to the Cape Coast dungeons, Elmina dungeons, through the Middle Passage to the unknown world. So many of them died. A lot has to sacrifice their own lives for their brothers and sisters when they got to the plantations where they were supposed to go and work. If it wouldn't be a problem for us, let's have a minute of silence in their memory. After that, I will say, may their souls rest in perfect peace. And we all respond respectively by saying Amen or Ashe. Please, let's have a minute of silence. May the good and innocent souls of our lost ancestors rest in perfect peace. Amen. So, once again, I welcome you to Asemanso by saying Akwaba. An awareness of our past is essential to the establishment of our personalities and our identities as Africans. Haile Selassie. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our own mind. Marcus Messiah Garvey Jr. And in our own African proverbs, it stated that until the tales of the hunt is told by the lion, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. As Africans, most of us living out in the diaspora had no hope, nothing, no idea about what our ancestors actually went through in the continent. They were held as captives, taken out of this continent as animals. They were classified as commodities. So that is where Haile Selassie came in, that we should be aware of our past so that we can use that past to shape us now, our personalities and our identities as Africans. Asemanso here happens to be one of the slave markets in the interior Ghana. Back then when Ghana used to be Gold Coast, there were several other empires. We have the Hunter Empire, the Akwemu Empire, the Ashanti Empire, and several others. And because wars were being fought among themselves as games or for territorial gains, Gold Coast stretched to part of Togo, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and during the transatlantic slave trade. So many people were raided from these angles. They were forced in chains and shackles, made to walk for a certain mile to the Salaga slave market. According to a renowned historian here in Ghana, Akosia Adoma Pepi, she documented in her book entitled The History of the Indigenous Slavery of Ghana that out of all the slave markets we have in Africa, Ghana had close to 63 of those slave markets. We have Salaga, Sampa, Cheneni, Kumasi, Asemanso here, Cape Coast Castle, Elmina Castle, all the way to the Christiansburg Castle in Osu, just to mention a few. A British historian, W.E. Ward, also traveled during the era of the slave trade. In his travel journal entitled A Short History of Ghana, he made mention that out of all the slave markets I've mentioned, Asemanso and that of the Salaga slave market played a major role, and Asemanso happens to be the largest slave market in the interior. The distance between Asemanso and that of the Salaga slave market is over 300 miles. For our forefathers, being children and pregnant women inclusively were placed in chains and shackles, made to walk for all these miles. They walked from Salaga through the Mole National Park. And during the time where they were going through the Mole National Park, they were full of wild animals. In order for them to walk freely through the park, most of them were being used as baits. They look among the chains and shackles, pick the weaker ones out, tie them around a tree, and they were given multiple whips around their backs. The blood that oozed out of them was sensed by the wild animals. And while the animals were busy feeding on them, the rest were moved out of the pack. They succeeded until they met the river called the Pra River. Most of our ancestors from the hinterlands were not exposed to rivers as huge as the Pra River. Because of that, it became a matter of the survival of the fittest. For that matter, the men who had the strength and the height to cross the river had to pick the women and children on their shoulders to cross. Those who were weak drowned in there. They were buried just at the bank of the Pra River. Getting here wasn't easy for them at all, especially the women. Aside being raped through the jungle, they were being treated unfairly because they were crying through the jungle on behalf of themselves, their brothers and sisters, and their children. They were treated with two different treatments. We call one the stone treatment, and then the other is the metal mask treatment. The stone treatment is done in a way that they look for stones a little bit wider than their mouth, and then force it in there before tying it around their neck. That way they allow you to hear their tears, but nobody hears their voice. Or they force a bunch of leaves into their mouth and then cover it with the metal mask. That way they could shut them up for them to shed only tears. They eventually got here in Asimanso, which happens to be the slave market. Here they were taken through series of activities. They were made to exercise their bodies. Here also they were fed, not because of their hunger. They fed them knowing that out of all the journey and all that, they have lost weight, and that the merchants who are coming from the Cape Coast Castle or the Elmina Castle, or let me say the various castles, are here for healthy-looking slaves. So, because of that, they were fed. All in the name of the amount they will be getting out of them. After the feeding, the men who had their beards bushy and then their hairs bushy were shaved off with a broken bottle. And now they will sort them now out according to age and sex. The children were always grouped with the women, with the sense that the women will keep them very calm. After all that was done, they walked them down to the river to take their bath. But before we go to the river where they had their last ever bath, we will be talking about the graves behind me here. In the ancestral graveyard, we have 3 different graves. Here lies the mortal remain of Madam Krista from Kingston, Jamaica, Samuel Carson from New York City, United States. And the last one, before I talk about it, I will tell you more about these two, how they got here. Krista was a former slave captured from Ghana here. On arrival in Jamaica, she took it upon herself to go on a hunger strike. She wouldn't feed on anything being fed to them by the British. But back then, if you are found rebelling against the food, they have several treatments for you. One is to use the chisel and hammer method. To force you to eat, they'll have to knock your teeth out with a chisel and hammer. Put a funnel in there, dish the food into the funnel. With the help of water, they push it down your throat. That way you stay alive for them not to lose their valuable income or their money used to purchase you. Crystal, knowing exactly what these people are, and because she was an African, or still is, because she is still here with us, believe in what she wanted to achieve. Whenever she is forced to eat, she will put her hands in the mouth and then vomit the food out. History has it that her dying wish was, whenever slave trade ends, they should bring back her bones. Anything that is remain of her should be brought back home to be buried here. In 1998, this came back. Samuel Carson, on the other hand, also was the first African American to rise to the highest rank in the Navy. But history about this gentleman here is unknown to so many people, because they believe he was an enslaved African who rose to the highest rank in the Navy. So because of that, they wouldn't acknowledge that about him. He died and he wasn't given a befitting burial.